Okay, so one of my favorite movies was Schindler's List, 1993 by Spielberg. This is an industrialist, Oskar Schindler, who was very wealthy, went to Czechoslovakia, started a munitions plant, was a Nazi. He started needing people in the plant, started hiring people. So the Jews were available in that town, so he brought them in. The Nazis came and started taking his people. And he got to know these Jews, and he really started to understand their stories, and there was a shift in him. So Oskar Schindler ended up saving 1,100 people because he pretended that they were making munitions, and he actually made them faulty so the Nazis couldn't kill and do what they were all destructive. But purpose of that story for me, at the end, he was there with his car and his wife, and he went up to his general manager, a Jewish man, and said, "I could have done more." He said, "This ring, I could have bought more Jews. This car, I could have bought," because he bribed the Nazis all the time to do this. So I'm curious about regret. That's what I want to talk about today. I still think about the 5th grade, Mary Bobbitt, I remember her name. She was severely disabled, and my friends all mocked her and bullied her. I didn't participate, but I didn't speak up. I did not ever say anything. When I was leaving the State Department and interviewing in New York with investment banks, I had this meeting with the head of investment banking. Went into this cavernous office, and I've had an eclectic, weird life and career. And he said, "I really think your resume is crazy. You've done stuff in East Africa and White House and all this stuff. Doesn't make any sense, but it's really interesting." And then he said, "I'm in prison. It's a really nice prison, but I'm in prison." And he said, "I'm alienated from my 3 children. I'm on my 3rd divorce, but I have unimaginable wealth." And then he said, "How did I ever get here?" So I left, and I puzzled over that question. In every career that I've been in, whether it's Goldman Sachs, where I was for a while, State Department, White House, I puzzled over this thing. Why do we make these decisions that are really destructive in our life, and we regret them? And I think it's because we're fed a narrative by our culture of what's worthy, beautiful, and good. And these things basically don't serve us well. My friend David Brooks has a lens through which he views this. He talks about resume values and eulogy values. And the resume values are all the accolades we get, where we went to school, size of our house, income level, all those things. On the other hand, the eulogy virtues are those things people will really remember you for. He showed up. He was a good person. Which ones do you think will be remembered the most? It'll be the virtues, the eulogy virtues. There's a lot of books written today about all the practices that make us great leaders and find meaning in our life. There's a movement up at Penn about happiness. There's some great teaching that goes on. And there's all these books written about, if you meditate, if you keep gratitude lists, all those things really do feed meaning. And I agree with them. I actually have a book like that called Rethinking Success. But I would say something else that's underappreciated are the regrets we need to avoid in life. And I'm going to talk about 5 of them real quickly here. 5 regrets to avoid, because these things will bite you if you don't look at them. Not embracing your unique story. So why do I talk about story? Story is everything about us. Some of the parts of our life are pretty crazy, funny, crazy. I was out in Scottsdale with a group of people about 5 years ago, and I said to the group, what will surprise us about your story? This Indian guy spoke up and he said, his name's Robbie Patel, and Robbie said, I hold the long distance swimming record in India for children under 2. So none of us believed him. A week later, he sends me a picture of his father was an Olympic diver in India. He's holding his son, who on the cover of the equivalent of Sports Illustrated, he had just won the race. Our stories define, on a more serious level, who we are, what we become. I tell my MBA class, I teach at Georgetown, how many of you grew up in raging, angry households when you were growing up? Half of them raised their hand. I said, here's the good news and bad news. The bad news, that's going to be your life unless you do the work and decide to pivot. We have to look at that story because it affects so much of who we are. So that's a regret. A lot of us don't do that work. And as a result, it keeps popping up. I had a conference in Baltimore before I came over here with 200 CEOs. And one of our guys that I asked to speak, who's pretty famous, the CEO of a Fortune 50 company, he said an interesting thing, because he's always been kind of an angry guy. He said, I played sports my whole life. My father only came to games where I was going to start. He didn't care. He didn't have any relationship with me unless I performed well. That's been his whole life, and you could feel that when you're with him. And unless he does the work, you feel like, okay, I get him now, but it's not attractive. Our stories really define us. A few years ago, Peter Buffett, Warren Buffett's son, was in my office. He's a friend. And he said this to me, we're all born into someone else's story. And he said, here I am in Palo Alto. The only reason I got into Stanford was because of my last name. He was really honest about it. And then my father famously announced he wasn't leaving us any money. And he said, that kind of sucked. And then he said this, he said, then my mother called a few months later and said, Peter, one of his grandparents had died and left him some money, $93,000. That day, Peter packed his car in Palo Alto, drove to LA to shape his story. He became a musician. But we all, if we're not careful, end up living someone else's story. So anyway, that's the first regret I think we need to really work hard to avoid. Okay, second regret. Choosing transactional over authentic relationships. I hate the term networking. Oh my gosh. It's kind of like, hey, I don't like you, you don't like me, but maybe you can help me. You know, what the hell is that all about? So I think transactional stuff can really, really be pretty empty at the end of the day. We have a loneliness epidemic. 1 out of 2 people in America self-report that they're acutely lonely. Vivek Murthy, the former Surgeon General, named not obesity, not smoking, but loneliness is the greatest crisis, public health epidemic and problem in our country. It's a loneliness epidemic. Robert Putnam at Harvard wrote a book. It's called Bowling Alone. Putnam describes how all the mediating structures that used to be the glue for our lives are gone. The extended neighborhood, the family, the church, the synagogue, whatever, the religious institute, all those things are gone now. And he uses bowling as a metaphor. And he says bowling used to be the epitome of a social time, a place where you interacted. If you go to a bowling alley in a lot of towns across America, people are alone now. That's hard to believe. So I heard about this woman in England, and a police officer came to her house. She had been scammed of 35,000 pounds, which she was on a fixed income, elderly woman. That was quite a bit. And the police officer said to you, why did you keep giving this young man money when you knew, you kept doing it and giving him money, he never paid you back. Why'd you do that? She simply said this: if he didn't call me or stop over, I'd never talk to another human being. So this enterprising police officer started something in that town called chat benches. Isn't that a cool thing? So in other words, if you want to talk, you go into the park, there's a bench dedicated to that. Let's have a conversation. And it's a phenomenon that's growing because people don't know how to have friends. I spoke at the orientation at Georgetown, and the guy that was before me, I was kind of shocked. I thought it was a joke at first. He said, this is 500 MBA students. He said, now, when you meet somebody, say hello to them. Then you might even extend your right hand and shake. I was like, is this a joke? But people, because of COVID and other things, don't know the basics about how to show up, how to have a friend. Social media is, isolating us more and more. 1 out of 3 girls under 12 thought seriously about committing suicide. Social media is doing some very toxic things. Jonathan Haidt's written a lot about that. Okay, so let's go on to the next regret. Not valuing weakness and failure. So in my MBA class, I say the connecting tissue. The thing that brings us together is not where you went to school, how smart you are, how rich you are, how good looking you are. It's your broken parts. So I said this, and this guy on the front row named Clark said, Professor, I'd like to say something. I've been trying to get in this class. I'm finally in, so I am all in. And he says this: I've lived in the shadows my whole life. I've had a debilitating stutter that made me never have friends. I was so embarrassed to ever interact with anybody. But I was very strong academically. Went off to college, was in an Ivy League school. My sophomore year, same problem, had no friends, hated my life. Then he said, I decided that night I was going to take my life. But before I do, I'm going to go out and talk to people, because it doesn't matter. I'll be dead tonight. And I'll stutter, they'll laugh at me and humiliate it like everybody else. So he went out, and 2 things happened. The more he started talking to people, the easier it got. He wasn't stuttering as much. And then, as he talked about his stutter, others started sharing with him, well, you think that's bad? Here's what I have. And so for the first time, he was connecting, not on the basis of what a rock star he was, but on the basis his weakness, his brokenness. And then he looked over and said, Professor, I have one other thing to say. And we were all like, okay, this is pretty heavy for the first 5 minutes. He said, I am the student body president of my MBA class here at Georgetown. So everybody kind of paused, and I said, how many of you feel safer because of what he shared, what Clark shared? Everybody raised their hand. I said, if you remember nothing else, remember that everybody's struggling with something. Learn to connect on that basis, and you will have true friends. Not on the basis of how great you are, but on the basis that you're human, just like everybody else. 4, defining success too narrowly. So Clayton Christian said this: how will you measure your life? It's really interesting when you start thinking about that. We all need to figure out, what is the measure? How are we going to do that? So I'd urge us and me to just think about, what is your definition of success? How much is enough? They polled all these people. some with a net worth of 1,000, some with $1 billion. Asked them how much would be enough. They all said the same thing twice. That would make them feel like they were successful. It's a fool's errand to chase that. Next. No one of us are going to say this on our deathbed. I should have bought more crap. We won't. So live in light of the end, because the things that are going to matter are very different. Okay, last regret. Having the wrong audience. We all try to please somebody. That father that never gave us the approval. That teacher that said in the 5th grade, you're stupid. Whatever it is, we have these audiences. One of the beauties about doing the work is to really look and find out what is driving you. This palliative nurse called Bronnie Ware in Australia, she listened to thousands of people on their deathbed. The greatest regret they had, the greatest regret was not living the life they should have lived, but living the life they felt like others wanted them to live. So the Quakers have a great line. I love this. If I ever had a tattoo, it'd be this. Live to please an audience of one. Whether that's yourself or God, do that. And it has implications for other things. Okay, let's go on. To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you anybody but yourself. Hardest thing we can do. But that's where freedom comes. Don't live somebody else's story. Find your audience. This is August Landmaster, everybody. 1936, Nazi shipyard. Everybody there is giving the Nazi salute, but August Landmaster. Look into him. He was brave. He had a different audience. It was risky. Cost his wife's life. She went to a concentration camp. Next. Okay, the unexamined life's not worth living. I think one of the most important things is to create space to examine regrets. We're not going to regret the things that we did wrong. We're going to regret the road not taken. Anyway, thank you for being here, and live to please an audience of one. That's what I'm going to try to do.